When the patriarch of the Gallagher family passed away, the vultures immediately descended. Audrey watched her stepmother and brother inherit millions, leaving her with a battered wooden desk they called garbage. But what they didn't realize was that her father's true fortune wasn't in his bank account. It was hidden in the wood. The mahogany-panelled office of Thomas Hilliard, Esquire, smelled of old paper and expensive cologne. Outside the towering windows, a relentless Boston rain lashed against the glass, matching the heavy, suffocating atmosphere in the room. Audrey Gallagher sat rigidly in a leather armchair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across from her sat her older half-brother, William, looking impeccably smug in a bespoke Brioni suit, and her stepmother Sylvia, who was aggressively dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. Audrey's father, Alfred Gallagher, had been a titan in the New England antiquities trade. His shop in Beacon Hill, Gallagher & Sons Antiques, was legendary, catering to politicians, old money families, and international collectors. Alfred was a brilliant, eccentric man who loved the history of objects more than the money they brought. But 2 weeks ago, at the age of 72, a sudden and massive heart attack had taken him from them. Audrey had been shattered. She and her father had been incredibly close. She was the only one who spent hours in his dusty basement workshop, learning how to clean tarnished silver and restore French polish to 18th century chairs. William, on the other hand, was a ruthless corporate liquidator who despised the antique business, and Sylvia was a socialite who merely tolerated Alfred for his staggering net worth. Thomas Hilliard cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "We are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Alfred William Gallagher. This document was finalized and notarized 6 months ago." Audrey frowned. 6 months ago? That was right around the time her father's health had begun to mysteriously decline, a period when Sylvia had suddenly fired Alfred's longtime nurse and taken over his care, restricting Audrey's visits. As Hilliard read the dense legal jargon, the blood slowly drained from Audrey's face. The estate was valued at roughly $9.4 million in liquid assets, prime real estate, and the commercial building housing the antique shop. To my wife, Sylvia Gallagher, I leave the Beacon Hill townhouse, the summer estate in Martha's Vineyard, and 60% of all cash accounts and stock portfolios, Hilliard droned on. Sylvia let out a delicate, practiced sigh. To my son, William Gallagher, I leave sole ownership of Gallagher & Sons Antiques, the commercial property on Charles Street, and the remaining 40% of all financial assets. Audrey's heart stopped. She waited for her name. She waited for the mention of the college fund he had promised to set up for her, or the small cottage in Vermont they used to visit. Hilliard flipped to the final page. "And to my daughter, Audrey Gallagher." Hilliard paused, a flicker of genuine pity crossing his eyes. "I leave the entirety of the contents within my private basement workshop, including the 19th century Davenport writing desk, to do with as she pleases. It is my hope she remembers the value of hard work." The room went dead silent. William let out a sharp, derisive bark of laughter. "The basement? He left you the junk room. William, please have some respect," Sylvia scolded, though the corners of her mouth twitched upward in a satisfied smirk. "Alfred knew Audrey always liked playing in the dirt down there. It's fitting." "There has to be a mistake," Audrey said, her voice trembling. "My father would never leave me with just basement scraps. He told me he was updating his will to ensure I could open my own restoration studio." "The document is ironclad, Audrey," Hilliard said softly. "Signed by your father and witnessed by 2 independent parties." "Independent parties hired by Sylvia, I'm sure," Audrey snapped, standing up. William stood as well, towering over her. "Watch your mouth, Audrey. Dad's mind was slipping at the end. He realized who was actually capable of managing his legacy. You're a 24-year-old barista with an art history degree." What were you going to do with a multi-million-dollar business? If you want the junk in the basement, you have exactly 48 hours to clear it out before I bring the dumpsters in. I'm gutting the house on Monday. 2 days later, Audrey found herself standing in the damp, dimly lit basement of her childhood home. Upstairs, she could hear the clacking of Sylvia's heels and the loud, obnoxious voices of William's contractors assessing the property for a modern remodel. The basement was filled with broken chair legs, shattered stained glass, rusted tools and boxes of unsalvageable scraps Alfred had hoarded for parts. And sitting in the center of the concrete floor was the Davenport desk. It was a monstrosity of Victorian design. Heavy, dark, burled walnut, a slanted writing surface covered in cracked green leather, and thick, chunky wooden legs on rusted brass casters. It was battered, heavily water-stained, and practically worthless on the market. Audrey traced her fingers over the chipped wood, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. It wasn't about the money. It was about the profound rejection. Her father had left her the literal scraps of his life. With the help of a rented U-Haul and a sympathetic neighbor, Audrey hauled the heavy desk and a few boxes of her father's favorite hand tools out of the house. As she drove away, she saw William standing on the front porch, arms crossed, watching her leave like the trash was finally being taken out. Life in Audrey's cramped, third-floor walk-up apartment in Somerville was a stark contrast to the luxury of Beacon Hill. The Davenport desk took up half of her small living room, sitting there like a dark, mocking monument to her disinheritance. For the first 3 months, she couldn't even look at it. The grief, coupled with the crushing reality of her financial situation, kept her paralyzed. She was working grueling double shifts at a local cafe to afford rent, while her brother made headlines in the local business journals for selling off her father's priceless antique inventory at exorbitant markups to foreign buyers. William was liquidating their father's legacy, turning generations of history into cold, hard cash to fund his lavish lifestyle. One freezing Tuesday in November, an unexpected medical bill for a minor dental emergency completely wiped out Audrey's checking account. Desperate, she called a local furniture appraiser to look at the Davenport desk. The man, a brusque dealer named Miller, barely spent 2 minutes looking at it. "It's a reproduction," he grunted, tapping the side of the desk with a pen. "Late 1920s, maybe. The veneer is peeling, the leather is ruined, and the locking mechanism on the side drawers is jammed. I'll give you $150 for it. Maybe $200 if you deliver it to my shop." Audrey looked at the desk. $200 would barely cover her groceries for the month. But as she watched Miller roughly handle the wood her father had touched, a sudden, fierce protectiveness flared inside her. "No," Audrey said firmly, "I'm not selling it." After Miller left, Audrey sat on the floor next to the desk. "What were you thinking, Dad?" she whispered to the empty room. "Why this? Why leave me this?" She decided she was going to restore it. If it was the only thing she had left of him, she would make it beautiful again. She brought out the box of his old tools, grabbed a bottle of Murphy oil soap, and got to work. She started by cleaning decades of grime off the intricately carved side panels. As her rag moved over the wood, she felt the familiar rhythm of the restoration work they used to do together. It brought a bittersweet peace to her chaotic mind. Hours passed. It was 2 a.m. when she started working on the internal cubbies beneath the slanted writing slope. The Davenport desk was peculiar. The writing surface lifted up to reveal a shallow storage area, while the right side of the desk featured a stack of functional drawers, and the left side featured dummy drawer fronts to maintain symmetry. Audrey was using a small dental pick to clear hardened wax out of a crevice in the back of the internal storage area. She pushed a bit harder than intended, the metal pick slipping and hitting a piece of wooden molding at the very back of the desk. Click. Audrey froze. The sound was sharp and metallic. It didn't sound like wood cracking. It sounded like a latch releasing. She set the pick down and pressed her fingers against the moulding. It was loose. Her heart beginning to race, she applied pressure, pushing the moulding to the left. It slid smoothly, revealing a tiny, hidden brass button recessed into the wood. Audrey held her breath and pressed the button. A loud clack echoed in the quiet apartment. Suddenly, the entire bank of dummy drawers on the left side of the desk, the ones that had been nailed shut and immovable for as long as she could remember, popped outward by half an inch. Her hands trembling, Audrey grabbed the edges of the false drawers and pulled. The entire side of the desk slid out on hidden greased iron tracks. It wasn't a set of drawers at all. It was a massive, vertical pull-out compartment, cleverly disguised by the exterior woodwork. A cloud of trapped, stale air escaped as she pulled the compartment entirely free. Inside the hidden vertical chamber sat 3 objects: a heavy, tarnished metal lockbox, a thick, leather-bound journal, and a pristine white envelope. Audrey grabbed the envelope first. Written on the front, in her father's unmistakable, elegant cursive, were 3 words: "For my bird." Tears pricked her eyes. It was his nickname for her. She ripped the envelope open and pulled out a single sheet of heavy cotton paper. "My dearest Audrey, if you are reading this, then you remembered the lessons I taught you in the workshop. You looked closer. I am so sorry for the pain I have caused you, and for the public humiliation of the will you undoubtedly had to sit through. Please know that the document Hilliard read was a necessity, a smoke screen to protect you. Over the last year, I discovered that Sylvia and William have been slowly poisoning me. They have been tampering with my heart medication, replacing it with something that induces cognitive decline and physical weakness. They thought I was going senile. They thought I didn't notice them forging my signature to slowly siphon the business accounts. They cornered me into signing that new will, threatening to tie the estate up in litigation for decades if I didn't comply, leaving you with nothing but legal debt. So I let them think they won. I played the part of the fading, foolish old man. I let them take the bank accounts and the real estate. But what William, the business genius, never understood is that the true wealth of our family was never in the banks. Audrey gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. They killed him. Sylvia and William had essentially murdered her father for the money. Her mind spun with rage and horror as she forced her eyes back to the letter. Before my mind began to slip from whatever they were giving me, I quietly liquidated my private, undocumented collection, the artifacts that no insurance company or tax attorney ever knew existed. I converted it all. The journal in this compartment contains every shred of evidence, every forged bank statement, and the private investigator reports I commissioned regarding Sylvia and William's actions. It is enough to put them both in federal prison for fraud, elder abuse, and perhaps worse. But the lockbox, my sweet bird, is your true inheritance. Audrey dropped the letter and grabbed the heavy metal lockbox. There was no keyhole. Instead, it was secured by a complex brass combination dial. She looked back at the bottom of the letter. The combination is the date we found the Paul Revere silver spoon. The day you decided to become a restorer. Take what is inside, Audrey. Disappear if you must, or use it to burn their empire to the ground. The choice is yours. I love you. Audrey's hands were shaking violently. The date. She was 12 years old. It was a blistering July afternoon in a flea market in Maine. July 14th, 2014, 071414. She spun the heavy brass dials, the metallic clicks echoing loudly in the dead of night. 7. 1. 4. 1. 4. She grabbed the latch and pulled. The lockbox hissed open. Audrey stared inside, all the breath leaving her lungs. She reached in, the dim light of her apartment, catching the glint of what lay inside. This wasn't just a fortune. This was absolute, undeniable power. and William and Sylvia had no idea what was coming for them. Audrey stared into the velvet-lined interior of the lockbox, her breath catching in her throat. There were no stacks of $100 bills or standard gold bricks. Alfred Gallagher had been a man of exquisite, secretive tastes, and his true liquid assets reflected a lifetime of navigating the highest, most discreet tiers of the global antiquities market. Inside sat a row of 6 heavy black velvet pouches, a stack of crisp, antique-looking parchment documents, and a custom-fitted mahogany display box. With trembling hands, Audrey opened the first velvet pouch and tipped it into her palm. A cascade of loose stones tumbled out, catching the weak light of her apartment lamp and fracturing it into a dazzling, blinding spectrum. They were diamonds, but they weren't clear. They were a deep, mesmerizing rose color. Audrey, having grown up around estate jewelry, instantly recognized them. They were Argyle pink diamonds, some of the rarest, most highly concentrated wealth on the planet. Since the Australian mine's closure, their value had skyrocketed. Just the stones in her hand were easily worth $3 million. There were 5 more pouches just like it. Next, she carefully opened the small mahogany box. Nestled in custom-cut foam were 3 heavy gold coins. She leaned in, reading the dates. 1933. They were St. Gordon's double eagles. Audrey felt a wave of dizziness. Officially, almost all 1933 double eagles had been melted down by the US government, and only one was legally allowed to be privately owned, a coin that had recently sold at Sotheby's for nearly $20 million. Her father had somehow acquired 3 off-market. Finally, she turned her attention to the stack of documents beneath the jewels. They were bearer bonds, issued by a discreet Swiss bank in the 1980s. Whoever physically held the paper owned the money. No names, no digital footprint. "Oh, Dad," Audrey whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. The fortune in the box dwarfed the $9.4 million estate William and Sylvia had fought so dirty to steal. It was easily worth $40 million, completely untraceable, and entirely hers. But as she reached for the leather-bound journal, the awe evaporated, replaced by a cold, settling fury. The journal was a meticulous, horrifying ledger of her father's final year. Alfred had documented everything. There were printed toxicology reports from Quest Diagnostics, paid for in cash, showing steadily increasing levels of heavy metals and unauthorized sedatives in his bloodstream. There were transcripts of secretly recorded conversations between Sylvia and William, discussing which doctor they could bribe to declare Alfred legally incompetent. There were even copies of bank wire transfers showing William funneling money from Gallagher and Sons into an offshore shell company to artificially deflate the shop's value before the will was read. They hadn't just stolen her inheritance. They had tortured her father, trapping him in his own failing body while they picked his pockets. Audrey closed the journal. Taking the money and disappearing wasn't an option anymore. Justice wouldn't be enough either. She wanted absolute destruction. She wanted them to lose everything on the most public stage possible. To execute her plan, she needed an ally, someone with unshakable credibility in the fine arts world who despised William as much as she did. She reached for her phone and dialed a New York number she hadn't called in years. Nathaniel Croft speaking. A crisp, aristocratic voice answered on the 3rd ring. Nathaniel was the managing director of Croft and Wentworth, one of Manhattan's most prestigious auction houses. He had been Alfred's fiercest rival, but also his most respected peer. "Nathaniel, it's Audrey Gallagher." There was a pause. "Audrey, my dear, I was heartbroken to hear about Alfred, and equally appalled to hear about the restructuring of his estate. I always assumed you would take the helm." "William took the helm," Audrey said, her voice hard, "and he's about to liquidate the shop's best pieces." "I know," Nathaniel sighed. "He's hosting a massive gala auction at the Fairmont Copley Plaza next month. It's a disgrace. He's turning your father's legacy into a circus. I want to ruin him, Nathaniel, Audrey said plainly. I have proof that he and Sylvia committed fraud, elder abuse, and theft. But I don't want to just hand it to the police, quietly. I want to bring his empire down at his own auction, and I need your help to set the trap. Audrey spent the next 3 hours explaining the contents of the Davenport desk. When she finished, Nathaniel let out a low whistle. Your father was a terrifyingly brilliant man, Audrey. Tell me what you need. Over the next 4 weeks, Audrey transformed. She liquidated a single, small pink diamond through one of Nathaniel's trusted, discreet brokers in Geneva, securing $400,000 in clean cash. She hired a top-tier legal team specializing in corporate fraud, handing them the journal to begin quietly building an airtight federal case. She also hired a private security firm to shadow William's every move leading up to the auction. But the masterpiece of her plan involved a specific piece of furniture William intended to sell at the gala. According to her security firm, William, greedy to inflate the auction's gross revenue, had secretly commissioned a shady restorer to cobble together a newly discovered 18th century Thomas Chippendale secretary desk, using spare antique parts and modern aging techniques. He planned to pass it off as authentic, expecting it to fetch over $1 million. Audrey and Nathaniel had everything they needed. The trap was set. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza was a sea of crystal chandeliers, flowing champagne, and Boston's most elite socialites. The room hummed with the quiet, electric energy of serious wealth. At the front of the room, displayed on a raised velvet stage, were the crown jewels of Alfred Gallagher's collection. William stood near the podium, looking intensely self-important in a midnight blue tuxedo, shaking hands with international collectors. Sylvia held court near the bar, dripping in diamonds that Audrey recognized as her late grandmother's, accepting condolences with practiced, theatrical sorrow. The heavy mahogany doors to the ballroom opened, and the room seemed to momentarily quiet down. Audrey stepped inside. She wore a stunning, floor-length emerald silk gown, her hair swept up in a flawless, classic twist. She looked nothing like the exhausted barista William had kicked out of the basement months ago. She looked like old money. She looked like a Gallagher. William's smug smile vanished the second he spotted her. He stormed over, grabbing her elbow roughly. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, keeping his voice low so the nearby guests wouldn't hear. "Security was supposed to keep you out. I bought a VIP paddle, William," Audrey said smoothly, pulling her arm away. "Under a corporate LLC, I have every right to be here. You don't have a dime to your name. Are you here to cause a scene and embarrass yourself? I'm here to watch you work, brother. Good luck." Audrey glided past him, taking a seat in the front row next to Nathaniel Croft, who offered her a subtle, encouraging nod. The auction began. The auctioneer, a fast-talking professional from London, moved through the smaller lots with ease. Paintings, silver sets, and antique clocks sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. William stood by the stage, beaming as the total revenue climbed. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer announced, his voice dropping to a reverent hush, "the premier lot of the evening, Lot 42, a previously undocumented, magnificent 18th century Thomas Chippendale mahogany secretary desk, flawless provenance. Bidding will commence at $800,000. The crowd murmured in appreciation as the velvet drape was pulled back, revealing the towering, intricately carved desk. "800,000, the auctioneer called. "Do I have 8? Hold on!" Audrey's voice rang out, clear and sharp, cutting through the ballroom like a knife. She stood up, William's face drained of color. "Security!" he yelled, pointing a shaking finger at her. "Remove her." "Before anyone places a bid," Audrey projected, turning to face the crowd of wealthy buyers, "you should know that this desk is a complete forgery. It is a Frankenstein piece, assembled 3 weeks ago in a warehouse in South Boston using 19th century scrap wood and modern epoxy. The ballroom erupted into gasps and furious whispering. "She's lying! She's a disgruntled, unstable family member," William shouted, panic edging into his voice. "Get her out of here." Nathaniel Croft stood up beside Audrey. The room instantly fell silent. In the world of high-end antiques, Nathaniel's word was absolute law. "Miss Gallagher is entirely correct," Nathaniel stated calmly, adjusting his glasses. "I have the receipts from the restorer who built it, commissioned directly by William Gallagher. Furthermore, the dovetail joints on the secondary wood of the drawers are machine-cut, a technology that did not exist in Chippendale's era. Selling this piece as authentic is a federal crime of wire fraud." "This is slander," Sylvia shrieked from the back of the room. "Alfred left the business to William because he was a genius. You're just jealous." "Oh, Sylvia," Audrey said, her voice dripping with ice. "I know exactly why Dad left the business to William. I found his journal in the Davenport desk." Sylvia froze. The colour instantly vanished from her face, leaving her looking hollow and terrified. William stumbled backward, bumping into the fake Chippendale desk. "The Davenport," William breathed, his eyes wide with sudden dawning horror. "Yes," Audrey said, stepping closer to the stage. "The desk you told me was junk, the desk you forced me to take. It had a hidden compartment, William. Dad kept everything. The toxicology reports from when you and Sylvia were secretly poisoning him, the forged bank transfers, the private investigator's logs." The silence in the ballroom was absolute, deafening. No one moved. The elite crowd watched, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the scandal unfolding before them. "You didn't outsmart him," Audrey continued, her voice trembling with righteous anger, but refusing to break. "He knew exactly what you were doing. He let you have the business so you would stop trying to kill him, and he left me the evidence to destroy you." "Lies!" William screamed, spittle flying from his lips. He lunged toward Audrey, but he never made it off the stage. "FBI! Nobody move!" The heavy mahogany doors banged open, and a dozen federal agents wearing windbreakers poured into the ballroom. Special Agent Harrison, the lead investigator Audrey's legal team had been working with, walked briskly down the center aisle. "William Gallagher and Sylvia Gallagher," Agent Harrison barked, flashing a badge. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, grand larceny, and the suspected poisoning and elder abuse of Alfred Gallagher." Pandemonium broke out. Guests scrambled out of the way as agents moved in. Sylvia dropped her champagne glass, the crystal shattering on the floor, and collapsed into hysterics as handcuffs were snapped onto her wrists. William didn't fight back. He just stared at Audrey, his arrogant facade completely shattered, replaced by the hollow, empty look of a man who realized his entire life was over. Audrey watched impassively as her brother and stepmother were led out of the ballroom in handcuffs, their reputations, their freedom, and their stolen wealth gone in an instant. 6 months later, Gallagher & Sons Antiques reopened its doors on Charles Street. The massive federal investigation had frozen and seized William and Sylvia's assets, returning the rightful ownership of the estate and the business to Audrey. William and Sylvia were both facing 20 years in federal prison, denied bail. The shop smelled of beeswax polish, old paper, and fresh beginnings. Audrey stood in the center of the showroom, wiping a speck of dust off a polished silver tea service. She had sold the fake Chippendale desk to a prop house and completely revamped the inventory. But the centerpiece of the shop wasn't for sale. Sitting in the most prominent window display, bathed in the warm afternoon sunlight, was a battered, heavy, Victorian Davenport desk. Audrey walked over to it, running her hand lovingly along the cracked green leather. They had thought she got the junk. They had thought she was weak. But Alfred Gallagher had taught his daughter well. He had taught her that true value rarely lies on the surface. It's hidden deep inside, waiting for someone with the patience, the love, and the strength to unlock it. Enjoyed this story of betrayal, hidden treasure, and ultimate revenge? Don't let the drama stop here. If Audrey's incredible journey from discarded daughter to antique empire queen kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Share this story with your friends who love a brilliant twist. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable, real-life inspired tales of hidden fortunes and sweet justice.